Hello, 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 everyone. I'm so glad to have you here. It's another Friday, and so it is a Friday Forum. And my name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an educator, an entrepreneur, and also wear many, many other hats, like many of you do as a mother and a grandmother and just, business owner. So I'm so glad and honored to have you here today. I'm also very honored and glad to have my guest and friend, Ethan Sawyer. So Ethan, we're glad to have you here. As everyone comes in, please put your name and your location so that Ethan can see where you're at. And since we're going to be talking about activities, I thought it would be kind of fun if you would put in your biggest activity that you did in high school. And I will share mine at the end, in the next few minutes. And I think some of you might be surprised and others you will not be surprised at all. So actually, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you two things, but give you one or two things that you were involved in when you were in high school. So I know many people are off and about and doing lots of things. So I'm very glad that you've taken the time to join us today and be a part of our Friday Forum. So Ethan, you can see we've got people from Boston, from all sorts of FBLA, people have done FBLA, band. We've got people from, Hudson Valley, California, Texas. I know I have people from Switzerland and Colombia, all sorts of places. And we're just so honored and glad to have so many people and all the different things that everybody has done. As you're joining us and thinking about this, I wanted to share a little bit about Ethan, our guest today. Ethan, I've known you for, I don't know how many years, quite a few number of years. So
yeah, 10 more, maybe.
Yeah,
more.
I mean, we've watched each other learn and grow. And I remember when you told me, I asked you one time how you came up with the name of the college essay guy. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And so what was your answer? How did you come up with that?
Well, there's so the short version, I guess, is the 45-second version is I was at lunch with a friend and she was a college counselor and she was hearing me talk about essays and seeing my excitement. And she was like, she kind of looked off at this and she's like, you could be like the college essay Jesus. And I was like, I don't know about that. And I said, I could be like the guy, maybe. And so after we finished our coffee, I went and got in the car and I opened up GoDaddy and I just searched college essay guy. And I was like, oh, the URL is available. So then I bought it for whatever, $10. And here I am 10 years later or whatever. And that's a thing that many people associate with me. Little did I know this would become sort of like, a turning point in my life. But that's the short version.
And I think that's a lot of our journeys are often very much like that. We just don't realize and you pick up a thread and just kind of go with it. I love seeing all the different things. Usherettes. I've never heard of an usherette. And I think that's so cool. Donna and Jessica said she was involved in political activism and just ban all these different things that people have done. So one of the things that I did in high school that became a real turning point for me, I was invited by a friend to participate on our forensics team. And so she didn't want to go alone, so she invited me. And so I joined the forensics team. I didn't do debate, but I ended up doing oratory and, poetry and all those things. But I learned how to speak in front of people. And I really, truly credit that with where I'm at, what I'm doing now, because I had to put together these speeches. I had to learn how to think on my feet. And of course, I was dating all the debaters, so that didn't hurt either.
All the debaters.
But that was one of the things that I did in high school, but I couldn't do a lot because we were on a cattle ranch and I had to go home and help with the cattle. So one of the other activities I did is I gentled a horse. We called it breaking horses. You don't call it breaking horses now. But when I was 14, I broke my own horse, trained her, broker to a saddle, all of that. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about me, that I really, deep at heart, I'm still a Colorado cowgirl, no matter where I live and here in California. So what would you say your biggest activity? I know you had an interesting background too, because
Yeah,
you
my
moved around a
biggest,
lot.
I was, well, and related to that, I think, Cindy, like I was a theater kid because, and I didn't discover this until doing, of all things, a college essay exercise later, but I saw how like I was really, because I moved around, I went to like 13 schools, I went to 3 kindergartens, and I was like looking for friends, and I found a home in theater, and it was like a place where people would hug and they weren't without shame, and we could talk about hard stuff and explore different. I think also because I was a missionary kid, I didn't always feel free to like express, the a wide range of like, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. And the part of that was just being a people pleaser too. But theater kind of gave me permission to explore these different sides of myself. So I fell into that big. And then I did speech and debate, but only because it allowed me to do more theater, because it wasn't like actually debating ideas. It was like we would do little 10-minute essentially scenes, in this formal way. But yeah, theater nerd all the way.
And it is interesting. And I think our students sometimes don't realize how these activities or things they're involved in are going to, reverberate through their lives and come back in different ways. And that's why it's not about what activities they do, but finding that meaning and finding that depth. And and we're seeing in the chat too, working, a lot of people work to, doing Sundays and ice cream. I, totally can relate to that. And many of us can. And just having all those different things. So that's our topic today, is to talk about activities, because in writing, sometimes we don't really think about it. And our students especially don't really see that from that lens of, oh, I've got to write this. And so I think it's an important aspect. And I've noticed that you have a lot of emphasis on that and really can help students drill down into that. So let me introduce, I'm going to give everybody, because there may be some people who don't know quite about who you are and what you do. So I just want to share this, that I know you're an internationally recognized expert in college essays and in admissions. You've written 2 best-selling books through Amazon, the College Essay Essentials and the College Admission Essentials, which I look at. I can't show everybody, but yes, I have those. You also have a degree from Northwestern University in Performance Studies, an MFA in Acting from UC Irvine, and 2 college counseling certificates. You've been reading and training and using storytelling. And I remember this was one of the first things that we talked about, was how you can apply the principles of writing a screenplay to writing essays. And it really resonates with students. They get it. They all watch media. They all do those things. And now, they all do social media and all those things. So that is, you by and large are a storyteller. Is that correct?
I'd say that's true. I mean, I really just love it. And I worked at a video store. That was another one of my activities. So I think that that plus the theater sort of inspired me to study theater and filmmaking. And that was the plan A until I got a job helping students with their college essays. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of going to work together. And yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, I mean, as I think about, well, let me let you lead, but I'm kind of like, I have an idea for an exercise that maybe we could try, that it's going to kind of maybe blend what we've been talking about so far with activities with like an actual practical exercise that counselors could use. Could we just try it and just jump into it?
Yeah, let me mention one other thing that I know is a very core value of yours, and that's diversity and equity. And I've had you come and talk about that. And I know you have a pay-as-you-go approach, and you're very dedicated. You have the Scholar Match program, which I know many of my students through UCLA have participated in. And so I see that as another aspect, and see you as a leader in our profession in that way. So with that lens and that focus of what you have is you're very, very committed to that diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
Yeah, thanks for naming that, Cindy. I feel really seen in that. And that's something that when I'm trying to make decisions about if we were to talk business, it's like, what impact does this have in terms of access to higher education? Because my belief is that, I mean, I think that we're all trying to do that as counselors. And I think that there are ways that we can do that, even better. So I'm often thinking about that and happy to talk about that more today if folks have interest later.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It permeates everything that we do, and wherever we're serving, our students and families, whether we're in schools or a nonprofit group or as an independent. Many of us have been in all those different roles. It's what we can all do together to bring things, bring awareness and bring it to focus. And so, and as a first generation student, I know and understand the value, and I've worked with Avid and really promote, help see that impact that can have too. So, so let's dive in. What kind of activity do you have in mind, Ethan?
So I was having dinner with some friends from college essay guy, and we were talking about our identities, and we went around the circle and we were having pizza, I think, and we shared a little bit of each of our identities. And there were two questions that we asked. One of the questions was, what's an identity, or what's a way that you identify that you feel like people don't always see, especially when they first meet you? So you just shared one, cowgirl at heart, that the sort of country, like farm-like background is an identity that maybe you don't necessarily lead with, but is some part of who you've been in your life. And so we ended up going on the circle and kind of tweaking the question. And this is the question that I want to ask, and I would love for folks to share in the chat if you're open to it. Mm-hmm. It's, what is an identity that you've, to some extent, left behind? And what I mean by this is that you're not actively necessarily nurturing that. And an example of this for me would be like an identity that I've left behind is like theater nerd. I think that I still love the theater and I still will go to the theater, but I'm not so immersed in it that it's a big, huge part of my identity. But it definitely has shaped me in some really powerful and potent ways. So I'd just be curious to hear from folks, if you'd be willing to share in the chat, what are some identities, or what is an identity that you feel like you've left behind? And I don't mean left behind in the sort of sad sense, but it's like not something that you're doing now, but it is a way that was a big part of your life before. And I'll just pause for a second to let folks type.
Yeah, we're getting lots of good responses already. Creative side, band, theater. Look at this classroom teacher, researcher, athlete, Californian. Yeah. Journalist, writer.
What I notice as I read these is like, what I'm projecting is there's like a little bit of like softness that comes when I think about these identities for myself. And there's like a little bit of vulnerability where it's like, yeah, this was a big, huge part of me and who I was, and there's like a reverence for it in some cases for me of like gratitude to that place, even though I'm still not actively involved in it. And then also there could be some like pushback or kickback. There could be identities that it's like, yeah, I used to identify as I don't know, someone I was just looking like financial analyst. Like I imagine that's probably mixed. It's like in some ways it's like, yeah, there were some great things I learned, but other parts of me is like, I ended up moving to something else, maybe counseling, that maybe felt like more in alignment. So a second question that I think is interesting, and I think is especially useful with students, is what's an identity? And so I'm actually asking this to everybody on the session today. What's an identity that you're currently leaning into? And you're maybe not ready to fully embrace it, and you might even be a little bit shy to type it in. But like an identity, for example, that I'm leaning into is like pickleball player, because I jumped on the bandwagon a year ago with everybody else. And I'm like, I don't know if I would be ready to call myself a pickleballer, but it's something that I'm definitely spending a lot of time doing and thinking about. So I'd just be curious I think this is a vulnerable thing. So I'm not going to like remember these later and be like, hey, you said you're this now. and hold you to it. But what's something that you're kind of on the verge of being willing to claim? Or, like I said, identity that you're leaning into. And I'll read a couple of these. We have a couple: empty nesters,
Mhm.
business owner, retiree.
I love the travel planner. I'm totally with that. Allison, you and I ought to get together because that's what I'm looking at.
Vocal presenter and advocate for trans kids. Hi, Shannon. Traveler. Yeah. Exercise buddy. Awesome. I offer this question because I think, and this is part of a larger exploration that we're doing internally at CG on identities, like within our organization, like the ways that we interact with one another, and also just with students. And there's going to be like a larger exercises that we're going to like share out later in the year. But I think that talking about identities is a cool way into talking about activities, because I think the next question obviously is like, okay, well, how does this identity manifest itself in your life? I think it's a different question than coming to students and saying, what are your activities? Which is fine. And you're going to get students, and some students are going to be like, I got all the things. And other students are going to be like, I don't really know. But I think asking them, what are some ways that you identify? Now, not every student is going to jump to that and be like, yes. But, and there are different ways that we can get an identity. There are all kinds of ways that we can identify. But I offer that as like a little mini exercise and a potential way into thinking about this and talking about this.
I think by rephrasing the approach and the question, instead of saying, well, what do you do to who you are? What are your identities? I think we would get different answers and different perspectives. And it helps the students to look at themselves from a different lens in terms of who they are and what they're doing. And isn't that really what colleges are looking for and why they ask for activities? So that they can learn more about the students and what they're going to bring to the campus. A great example that comes to mind for me is one of my students who's a junior this year was going over some things with him, and I found out that he is now starting to race micro racers, like little race cars. And and this is a big, he's from a farm. He's been around tractors and equipment, all his life. And now he's taking that and he's going to race that. And that is an identity that he truly has. But I can't tell you, Ethan, how many students I've had, especially in this area, who that never shows up on their college applications because they don't see it as an activity. And yet it is such a big part of their identity. I've had state class sharpshooters, who do skeet shooting, competitive shooting. They won't put it down. I'm like, why did you not tell me about this? Because they don't see that. And so I think that's a key thing in terms of looking and helping students look at activities, because it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. So how do we get the students to see it from that perspective? And how do they write about it once we get them there? Well,
so another way into this, I think, is identities is one way to do it. I think another way to do it, potentially, I'm going to share my screen here for just a second, is asking students, what communities are you a part of? And we can define communities in a bunch of different ways, like place, action, interest, circumstance. And just to give you some examples of communities that I've been a part of, I'm, in terms of place, I'm a Los Angelino. I am a third culture kid, having grown up in both Latin America and the US. I would say I've been a part of the North Carolina community, family members with Southern accents. In terms of action, I've helped co-organize a theater group of day laborers for immigrant rights work, and accept in terms of what I'm interested in doing, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Things that I'm interested in: books, basketball, theater, travel, circumstance, male identified, European ancestry, missionary kid. And so I think it really, I think asking students different questions can sometimes, and what I'm speaking to, I think, is like that frustration that I think as counselors sometimes feel with the kid who like doesn't do anything or thinks they don't do anything. I think it's really a matter of, and I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, here, knowing who's here, but is like finding different questions and ways in. And so that's what I'm hoping to sort of prompt here, as it were, in this first few minutes together. But yeah, so those are two ways, I think, of getting at what does the student do beyond just what do you do? It's really, I put this in the chat, but it's like the why and the who you are. And I think if we can get in and ask some interesting questions about those, then the follow-up is like, well, how does that manifest itself? And lo and behold, it might be video games. Maybe that's the thing, but understanding that why and having a deep connection to it is, I think, going to help students to write about it. But to your question about like, well, then how do we do it? I've got some practical exercises that some of y'all will know and some of you may not know. So the first one, I printed it out old school, and I'll share a link to it in a little bit, is my epic. I just wanted you to see the thing. It's my epic list of activities list verbs. So I'm going to show you I'll show you this on the screen for a minute. So
and we'll put, and you said you're going to share links, so I'll put links in the show notes as well,
great.
So that it'll be on my website.
This is some of y'all know this, some of you don't. This is my epic list of activities list verbs. So if I'm trying to describe, I'll zoom in here. If I'm trying to describe my work in theater, I might be initially, first draft is like, well, we did plays, and my verb might be did, or acted. But I probably did more for theater than I know. And if I look at this and I go, leadership, well, I guess I did coordinate. There was a fundraiser that we did when we were selling those bagels, and I'm totally the one who organized it. So I did coordinate fundraisers to, basically be able to fund the props built by the props that we were. And then when I look at this communication, I definitely was able to gain collaboration skills in theater. So what this is it's not just like use these verbs. It's actually going to be like a menu of ideas, so that it's kind of like, my joke is like when you show up to, the Cheesecake Factory, they don't just say like, what do you want? And you can have anything, because that's hard. They give you this menu. Now, granted, the menu is 80 pages long, so it takes you a little while at Cheesecake Factory because they pretty much have anything you want. But I think giving students a practical menu so they can start to go like, oh yeah, I'll take this verb, I'll take this verb, I'll take this verb. And I really love encouraging students to, of course, not use complete sentences. I don't need to, but to use these short verb phrases. Because I think these short verb phrases can start to reveal students, values. So just to give an example, I'm going to share a blog post here, but, if a student says, I'm a member of debate and we debated topics and attended tournaments and researched topics, it's like, we've seen these first drafts before. Mm-hmm. But if instead, we've got, I lead research and case writing, mentor younger debate students, organize mock debates, host an annual debate tournament, see additional info for awards, suddenly we start to look at these verbs. I lead, mentor, organize, like each one of those is pointing to a different skill or quality or value, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't need to like name these to you counselors, it's kind of obvious too, but I think showing students like simple examples like this, mm-hmm. and this is a blog post that if you just Google activities list college essay guy, students will see these. But the first thing that I recommend is like, what is a stronger verb? And first of all, I define a stronger verb, and it's more specific. So yeah, sure, they taught, but did they coach, mentor, train, or demystify? Because those words will get just a little bit more specific, and it's going to help a student stand out from every other student who's writing about teaching. Sometimes it gives more information, like, compiling, systematizing. And this is kind of a joke, but not. It kind of just sounds better. So like to mediate, mm-hmm. is sometimes more interesting than like solve. It's like mediate puts you in, it shows us an image of you like getting between people and like going, no, y'all, let's talk, let's figure this out. So the first thing I think that's a big thing is thinking about the verbs that students are using. And I just want to pause there and see if folks have thoughts about that, or Cyndy, if you have thoughts to share about that before we move on.
No, I think that's very true. And that's why oftentimes we need to disconnect the idea of activities from resumes, right? Because you think, oh, well, a resume is just a list of all the things that I've done, but the activity is much more powerful, and it gives them a lot more nuance. And they can't put it all. One of the reasons we want to focus on the activities is because it is more writing, and you can't put all of this in the essay. Right. It gives you an opportunity to the students to expand and share things in see multiple sides or multiple facets without having to address it all in the essay, because you can't do it even when there's multiple essays. They all have a focus and a purpose. You can't put that kind of thing in the, why do I want to go to XY college, the essay. So you have to be able to use those activities in those ways.
I want to do a quick informal poll in the chat. And I'm curious give me a yes if you already knew that resource and a no if you didn't know about that resource. And that's going to do a quick scan of like, how familiar are folks with college essay guide resources? So thanks. I'll look at that in just a second. It looks like we're about half and half so far. Oh, well, more yeses coming in. Okay. This is a crew that is familiar with these. So what that tells me is I'll go through these others a little bit faster because you might know these other resources as well.
Okay.
The second resource is like students often, and you've probably seen this, Cyndy, where they just don't know what to say about the thing. And they're like,
right.
It's theater, or it's basketball. And I played basketball and I showed up to practice. And so again, it's like the question, what questions are we asking students? So another resource that I use, it's got a silly name. It's called the BB's exercise, which stands for the best extracurricular activity brainstorm I've ever seen. But if we ask students these 5 questions, first, what did you do? And you can use that epic list to look at like, what did you do? But then what problems did you solve? I think a lot of times students don't think of basketball as being a inherently problem-solving venture. But when you think about, okay, well, what problems did we solve? Well, yeah, we did have to figure out how to raise money for the uniforms, or we did have to figure out, whatever it is, how to resolve conflicts with one another, or, sometimes that will start to spark certain ideas. And then in terms of the lessons learned, skills I gained, I use the values exercise, which many of you will know. The values exercise is just another different menu of like, here are some qualities that I learned through playing basketball or whatever it was. And I think just having them look at this and go, did I grow in terms of basketball? Yeah. Well, how did you grow? That starts to, bring in ideas. Did I become more productive because of basketball? Well, yeah, trying to balance that with everything else I was doing for sure. So this is for this middle one. The UCs, a lot of us have students that apply to University of California schools, are real big on impact and asking students, well, what impact did you have? How many boxes did you ship? How many books were donated? Those kind of numbers I think can be interesting and useful. And then how did you apply what you learned to somewhere else? There's not always going to be room to be like, and therefore I improved my study skills in biology, because that sometimes takes a lot of words. But this is an exercise that works really well for writing extracurricular activity essays. Because once a student spends, and I think for an activities list, if a student spends 3 minutes per activity and they do this, they're going to have enough content. But if they spend 15 minutes on this, they're going to have enough content for either their extracurricular activity essay or the UC personal insight question. This is one that I recommend again and again for generating content for the UC PIQ. And again, it's really just looking at what are those questions that we're asking. There's an example here of students, filling this in, and again, I come back to this one again and again because I feel like it's so productive for generating content. So pausing for folks, just curious if anybody's got anything to say about that, or Cyndy, you have thoughts to add in on that.
Well, I'd love to see if other people, because we're seeing a lot in the chat that people are familiar with those lists and that they're in your books. And it'd be interesting to see if people have used this with their students, because I think that is the key. And one thing I would recommend to everybody is you just try it. And the first time it may be a little rough around the edges, but the more and more you do these kinds of activities and frame things from this perspective, the more comfortable you get with it and the more natural it becomes, and it just becomes intuitive. And many times we do these things intuitively, not even realizing what we're doing. So and it looks like, Crystal's got links to Crystal, thank you. And Ethan posted links too. So I know I've used activities for my students. I have a grid that is similar to what you have, and it's based on the old UC questions, and I have them put in just bullet points of things about their school, their academics, their community, their extracurricular and personal. And I think one of the challenge with this activities, and going back to your example of basketball or theater or whatever, it's like they don't realize things that they do are count. I just play basketball. Well, what do you do? Oh, well, I keep score. I'm in this other sport, but I'm the scorekeeper for the basketball team, and keep track of everybody's statistics. Well, then I love how you have the students go back. It's not just what you did, but what did you learn from it? How did you grow? How are you going to apply it? And those kinds of things. That's the key. And that's the thing that they often don't realize. So I think that's a cue. Helps a lot for students to be able to really connect and relate. And as Shannon said, students get really excited sometimes that they get to write about these things because, I mean, and again, it's not just same thing as on the essays. It's not the activity. Some are not better or worse than others. I mean, just going home and babysitting. I know I've had students who couldn't be involved in, like me, they couldn't be involved in a lot of extra activities because they had responsibilities at home. Well, those are things to write about as well.
Yeah. And somebody was mentioning, I think it was Allison, was talking about the challenge of, well, there are two challenges. One, I think, so there's a whole, I just put this in there, but there's a guide to the UC activities list. I find that students are challenged both ways. They're sometimes challenged to get the descriptions down to 150 characters, but I find that students really struggle with getting it up to 350 characters. So just to, some of you are familiar with this already, but like the UCs ask for 347, up to 350 characters for these descriptions. Students don't have to fill them in, of course, but like, I love having students fill out the UC first and, because they're going to have lots more. So I see Cyndy nodding, and then trim them down to 150. So I think that, some students, you probably had this happen too, where they'll mistakenly do 150 words. And you go, great, so here's what a character is and what it means. And I mean, if they can get it to 150 words, then great, that's going to get us to 350 characters, no problem. But there's a whole, guide for that. But when it does come to helping students try and squish that down, sometimes it's possible. And sometimes there's just like, the students just like, I can't. And then we go, great. What essential could we add in the additional information section? And I think the UCs have gone on record almost at every UC conference that I've been to, and they've said, we encourage students to use the additional info, the additional comments section is what the UCs call it. So I would say I want to encourage folks to not be shy to have students include additional information in that section, because I think that, I don't know, I think there's sometimes shyness around doing that, or it feels like I'm not quite sure what to do that, but it's like, it's white space, use it up, give the context.
Exactly. That's what I tell them too. It's, if they're giving you a platform, use it, go for it. Although I know the UC say it's not for another essay, and it's not, but it still gives you an opportunity to tell a little bit more about yourself, your school, your program, all those kinds of things. So, because if you don't tell them, they're not going to know. And so I see that. I remember when the UCs added that description of the, like, you're in FBLA. Well, what is it? And it does. It's added a whole nother level of, well, what do I write and how do I describe this? And, and putting that in, it add a lot more stress, especially to the UC application as opposed to the Common App. But I agree with you. I like having students do the UCs. I have them do their personal insight questions first, and then they pick out which ones they want to use for the Common App, because they have so many more to choose from. And it's usually easier to expand it and it's very easy to cut things down. So
I like that as a strategy for the activities list, and I like it as a strategy for essays. I'm not supposed to call them UC essays; they're personal insight questions. But I think that I get excited when a student's like, I'm applying to the UCs and I'm meeting for the first time. I'm like, let's brainstorm those topics, because I think that sometimes makes it a lot easier for me to get to know them relatively quickly in that hour and a half. And then we shift into, like, it's going to give us a lot more context when we shift into the personal statement topics. So I've flipped it, and I'll certainly sometimes do personal statement first, but then when we sometimes get into the UCs brainstorming, and I'm like, oh, you do this and you do this. Wow. That, so a thing that I'll also do is, like, I find that after an initial session, the brainstorming session with a student, if I have students do the BBS exercises for their 4 different personal insight question topics, they're going to have a lot of great work to do, and it's going to help them, start getting into the writing process. It's going to give us a lot to talk about in our next session. So I like recommending that.
Yeah.
I want to share one more resource that's pretty practical that I call the value scan, and then I'll be done with stuff from this particular set of resources.
That was my next question. It's like, okay, how do you tie activities to their values?
Yeah, part of it is like teaching students to recognize values, because most students aren't taught, I think, to be thinking about this, and it's not a currency that every student, if it wasn't for me, but I think it's becoming more and more that students are talking about values. But a simple 3-question scan is like, when you look at an activities list description, which values are being clearly revealed, which values are kind of being revealed, and which ones are not in the description at all yet. So I just walk them through this example. So if it says responsible for taking minutes, I can see that they are obviously responsible. The student was updating the calendar and active member list, so they're organized, and then communicating with advisors. Okay, so these are starting to show some values. But it could be, for example, that this student wants to show leadership more clearly. And so then I would go, okay, if I scan your application and I'm looking for, some of the things that I really love to encourage students to do is like, especially for the UCs, is like leadership. Like, where is leadership coming through in your application? What does leadership look like for you? So if you were to ask, what are some of those qualities that I think are important? I'm not going to say maybe essential, for getting into like some of the more selective schools. Where does leadership show up? Where does service show up? And intellectual vitality, intellectual curiosity. I think we all know this. And so, but hopefully hearing me and seeing Cyndy nod is like, yep, totally. But, intellectual vitality is something that Stanford, when they were putting together like their materials for training readers and, training interviewers, is like, that's the thing that they're looking for. And I just think that's a lot of schools. So it's like, are you real smart? Can you do college level work? Are you serving others? So that service element. And again, leadership can look like so many different things for so many different students, but those are 3 of the things that I look for when I'm scanning things. And I think I don't literally say you need to have these 3 things, but those are things that I think I am looking for. The other one actually that I'll say is like, sometimes I'll look at a student's application and I'm like, there's something missing here, and I'm not sure what it is. And oftentimes it's maybe a really smart student, but I look at most of their activities, or I look at their essays, and I see them being really smart on their own in a vacuum, and I don't see that collaboration. And so sometimes I'll say, well, where are you working with others? And for some, they'll be like, oh, and they'll name 6 things, and great, let's see if you can bring that in. And others, for some students, it's more difficult. And I think that students can, quote unquote, get into schools even if they don't have collaboration as a big theme in their application. But it's something that over the years I've started to look for more and become more aware that that is an important element for students. We'll call it vibes, but the sense that the student is going to be a collaborative member, contributing member to a community. What is for you, Cyndy? What are some qualities that you like to see or you nudge students towards?
Well, I think that is definitely one of the things, is helping students to recognize and understand, when they're looking at, and their parents too, because this is also an issue that we deal with their parents as well. And they say, okay, I'm on the physics team, or, I'm on the robotics club or whatever. Colleges, their applications, they could, like Stanford or any of these other schools, could admit 6 or 10 classes of all these students that have all the same credentials. And it's your activities and your essay that's going to help differentiate you. And how do you demonstrate that intellectual curiosity? And that is key. So I'll give you an example. One of my students in my UCLA class was at a competitive, she's an international advisor, counselor at a competitive college here in California, and she had read an essay of a student coming from an Asian country, and on his way to school he noticed that people were mistreating snakes. And so he started researching and realized that they really contributed to their environment and, their community, and that these were the good things that snakes brought. So he started kind of educating people, and that's what he wrote about in his essay. That's a demonstration of intellectual curiosity that he was able to demonstrate. So, just taking something you're interested in, like, some of the activities from before, like Alice and others said, political activism or things like that. That's how you share that intellectual curiosity. It doesn't have to be you're the captain of the football team, or the class president. And that's the thing. Sometimes parents and students, and we even as advisors, get hung up on is, well, what's the leadership you've done? Well, the leadership is taking a role and saying, hey, I noticed that people are, going without, especially during COVID. One of the counselor talked about a football player who started crocheting, and he got all his buddies in the football team to crochet these little beanies, and then they donated to the hospital for the preemie babies. That's intellectual curiosity. That's more of the leadership and compassion. So, helping our students to understand that those things that they might be doing naturally. I have a student who started a sewing club during COVID. Like, go for it. Talked about that. That's really key. So, those kinds of things, they don't have to be the rock star in order to demonstrate that to the colleges.
Totally. There's weird stuff counts too. I'll sometimes say the weirder the better, and obviously that's an extreme case, but like, I think that, encouraging students and showing them examples of like uncommon activities and also uncommon uses of the activity section can be helpful. I want to share this other thing. We're leading 2 courses right now, which I'll say 2 words about at the end, but one of them is on helping students map out their application and supplemental essays. And, we're talking about the YS essay next week, and I'm going to share some new resources, but the other course is on highly selectives. And I think that, and this is led by Tom Campbell on my team, and I'm going to give a little share that he gives. But one of the things he talks about is like, he read for Pomona for years. And he was like, sometimes it was like those activities lists would come in and it would be like, yep, another student who's just crushing it and checking all the boxes. And for him, it was like those students who were doing it in an uncommon way. Let me show you what I mean by this. I'm going to share his presentation. I asked him, could I share a little bit of it? He said he could. This is what he's presenting on Wednesday, in fact. But some of the big points that he makes is more obviously isn't necessarily better. Right. I think sometimes students feel pressure to fill the entire activities list. And we know from what the Common App has told us that the average student puts in maybe 5 or 6 activities. And these are some of the qualities that, they look for. Self-directed, intellectual curiosity is one we've already talked about. Somebody mentioned in the chat, impact-focused, quantifiable. I think that if it doesn't fit, if all the impact numbers don't fit in the activities list, you can put it in the additional info, that's fine. What have you done outside the school? Is there anything non-traditional? And then, more and more, I think colleges, especially the UCs do a great job of this, of thinking about how family responsibilities play into things. So it doesn't necessarily have to be founding 16 clubs. It's like, what are those responsibilities at home? I think especially, coming out of the pandemic, but especially for students who have lots of responsibilities at home. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I want to get to some of the examples that he uses. But again, students shouldn't feel pressure to fill in all the activities. But here's some cool examples. So check this out. I'm going to zoom in on this. Whoops, I can't zoom in on it because it's not allowing me to zoom. But I'll just, actually, I can. Here we go. There we go. So, so JV varsity athletics. So cross country, our team, he's made it up, CEG Academy. CEG cross country is a tight and sometimes sassy community. Our team of misfits proudly placed first in our league and districts in 2016. And this goes against the typical advice and the advice that I was just giving, in fact, of like, make sure you're showing, exactly what are your responsibilities and what are your values? Well, this does show a value, I think. He says we're raw and competitive. And he also says we're sometimes a sassy community. So I'm really getting that sense of humor. And someone mentioned in the chat, I think it was Allison, a kind of unspoken thing. I say it's unspoken because I don't know that I say this to students, but like, I think what colleges are looking for is like, are you likable? And like, when I read this, I'm not going to say that to a student because I don't want them to be obsessing about like, well, what's going to make me likable? But, that's a quality. When I look at something that I'm into, I'm like, I like this student. Student says, I can't sprint, so I run lots of slower circles instead of fewer, faster circles, leading by example on a shockingly popular circle running team. And then nominated by the faculty, coaches help peers write and edit academic, analytic, and creative works. So not all of these have to be, creative, but I love to read anything, politics, sci-fi, and history. I enjoy getting lost in the poetry and words and learning from different perspectives. So again, we're getting values there. And let me zoom back for a second. Look at that. Reading is an activity? What? That's not fair. Can you do that? Well, this student did. And this student, I don't know if the student got into Pomona, but I think it was part of an overall application that was giving an impression of a student who demonstrates intellectual curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a student who wrote a book during COVID because she just wanted to see if she could do it.
Right.
And so she wrote about that,
right.
that experience and took a class. And so this brings up another point. And as people, now is a good time. We've got about 15 minutes left. If you have any questions for Ethan, put them in the question and answer. I don't have Carmen with me today. She's off in Lisbon on spring break. So she'll be back with us next week. But one of the things when you're looking at activities, and there's two questions here. First of all, a lot of times parents, we as college advisors often get parents who will call us and say, well, what should Johnny be doing? Should he found this foundation? Should he start this group or this organization? And it's really helpful for us to be able to come back and say, the colleges say that's not necessary. You don't have to create a foundation to stand out. You can put reading down and make yourself stand out that way. So those are some of the things that we as college advisors are faced with a lot in terms of parents thinking, oh, well, Johnny has to do X, Y, Z in order to stand out. So have you had any successful approaches with parents in that regard? Or, using some of these examples, I think helps parents to see it's okay to put reading down or, video gaming or some of these other things that students might be involved in.
Totally. I want to show parents successful examples of students who were accepted at schools and put wild or different things on their applications. The student who was wrote about, in one of his Stanford essays, having a bunch of polar bears on his bed, and he's the, backup quarterback for the football team. And he's like, but, from him, it was an essay about toxic masculinity and how he felt like he'd been sort of pushed to be fit into a certain box. So I want to show them those examples of students. But I with certain parents, and we can sense when this is happening, they're looking for a formula. Right? They're looking for what's the secret? And so we have to be careful that we don't just pendulum swing them and be like, the secret is not this, the secret is this. And so what I try to do is temper that with, having said this, and this is what makes the brain go short circuit a little bit, is I want to show you another example application of a student who did these things and had a perfect test scores and had all the things and didn't get into, Harvard and then, selective schools. He ended up at Northeastern with a 7-year scholarship. And he was really happy and had 2 deans call him and say that we really want you to come. We'll pay you to come. And, that worked out super well. So I want to just be careful that we're tracking for are they looking for the secret? And to be really real, I think that there are times when it can be tempting to say to parents, because they're looking for that assurance, that here's the secret, and that it can be really good for marketing to be like, I'll share with you the secrets. But if you've worked in this long enough, that there's not a formula. Right. And I think bringing students back and bringing parents back to recenter on what does success look like for this process? Because I think that oftentimes, whether we acknowledge it or not, even as counselors or as independent consultants, we have to be careful that we're not meaning that what success looks like. And again, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but that we're not sending the message sideways that success equals getting into these. Even saying successful college essays. If we're defining a successful college essay as an essay that got a student in or helped the student get in, I think that's an example of sending the message sideways, that's what success looks like in this process. And I think part of our job is to reorient even our definitions of success, or at least to invite questioning around what does that look like. And practically speaking, it's asking our families, and I'm sure many of us do this, what does success look like for you besides getting in? Let's just take that off the table. Besides getting into Stanford or not, what do you want to be able to say once you've submitted your applications? How do you want to feel? What does that look like to you? And I think it can do a thing where we kind of shifts the conversation. And I think for some families, they're going to be very facile with this. And they're like, yeah, for me, it's da, 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 da. And others will kind of pause and look at you and go, that's a good question. Maybe let me think about that. And I think that's the good work that this process can do. And I think that's part of our work. And it's like what makes it valuable beyond getting into college.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's like the conversation I often have with parents about the AP scores. There's no passing grade. It's a score. It's a score between 1 and 5, and so it's not a passing or not, because it all depends on the school and everything else. So what's success? It's where your student is. And over the last 3 years, especially with COVID, we've had such an emphasis on student mental health and the importance of transition. And that has really shifted the whole conversation about, well, what's success? Because we really need to focus on that mental health. So Peggy's asked a question, and we're having a great conversation on this, but I'm going to pose it to you too. What if a student has no quote unquote activities? How do you?
Well, yeah, Allison is speaking for me right now and saying, I've never seen a kid with 0 activities. They've done something. So I think that it sometimes takes digging. First of all, let me say, Peggy, I know that I've met that student multiple times where they just like, I don't do anything. I'm like, well, okay, what were you doing last night between 6 and 10? And they're like, I was on my computer. Like, what were you doing on your computer? And so it may take some like questions,
Uh-huh.
and
maybe they were like that this year too.
Playing video games. And it's like, great. So that's one. So you play video games. Let's just put it on the thing. What else? What else do you do on the computer? And so it's sort of, well, I don't know. I watch YouTube videos. Great. On what? And so then we start to look at, okay, well, what are their interests? What are they drawn to? And it may be a sort of frustrating, yeah, okay, Peggy's like, I said the same thing. So yeah, I mean, the questions you ask are probably the same questions I ask, which is like, we just kind of need to dig until we start to get to some of the things that it's like, okay, here's something, because chances are we can get to 3 or 4 somethings, even with those students who like, you ask, what have they done in terms of community service? And they're like, my mom signed me up for something, but I didn't go. And, you're just like, oh my gosh. And look, I want to like reorient for a minute and be like, I think oftentimes we're so used to working with students who have all the activities that when we come across one, but like, that's an expectation that we're bringing, right? Of like, you should have done things, even if we're not specifically saying that. And with students like that, I'll be honest, I think that I kind of look at, well, okay, when are we, or is it September? Are there a couple things? I'm not suggesting on this call that, suddenly they pack in and do all their community service. But I think even on a resume where a student has 0 community service stuff, there's something that they could do in the, 2 months before applying, so that they have something to put down, so that it's not absolutely blank, even if it means, and I don't like to do this with students because it feels like babysitting, but even if it means researching what are the local opportunities for community service that they can get involved, I want them to be more self-directed than that. And it doesn't feel like that's my job, but I think I can encourage them to do something, even if it is with what little time they have remaining. So, but I'm curious to hear others' thoughts on the chat if you've got ideas.
Yeah. Well, and going back to that, the activities, because I have that student, everything, I finally told him, I don't know is not an answer. I will not accept, I don't know, because everything I asked, I'm like, I don't know, I don't care, it doesn't matter. Like, okay. But in the end, I think this student is not ready to go to a 4-year school. I really think he'll be much better off doing community college. So we're just kind of waiting to see. And I've brought that up with him. I've brought it up with his parents. So it goes back to that definition of success, because sometimes it's not going straight to a 4-year school. I just had this conversation with my daughter. My grandson's a freshman in high school this year, and she was saying, I think my son is perfectly happy going toward community college. It'll give him 2 years of maturity. And I was like, that is great. But one of the things he's interested in is food. And I didn't really realize this. And this is something he could really expand. He wants to try all sorts of food and all sorts of places. So like if I take him to another city, we're going to go look at food. That could be an activity and an interest. And, he's always looking up recipes and trying different things. So, that could be something too. So, it's so interesting, the variety of things that students can write about that they don't even realize. So yeah, a lot of kids did discover cooking. I had a lot of students who became handymen. They worked in their landscape and stuff during COVID. And then when they could go back to school, I had one student told me, he's like, why am I going to go back to school? I can sit here and work on my parents' bathroom and listen to my teacher. It's like, why do I need to go back to school? And he had a good point. And so it was COVID really created opportunity for a lot of students in that way. So if someone wants to learn more about these courses or some of the things we've talked about, Ethan, what should they do?
Yeah, we'll follow up with links in, via email, but let me just give you like the 45-second version of like the course that I'm teaching that started last week is on helping students map out their application and supplemental essays. It's, it's 6 modules, but it really walks through the strategy of helping students figure out what do I put where, essentially, is what we're often looking at. And then the other course that I mentioned that Tom is leading is helping students apply to highly selectives, which is a touchy subject because I don't want to mean students should be applying to highly selectives, but I do want them to have the context and in many cases reorient and realize that they need to expand their list, basically. So we started that one last week, but it's easy to sign up for both of these. Cyndy will share a link. And then for both of these, if you sign up for this course, you get 2 months access, and this course, 1 month access to this counselor community that we've started. And it's pretty cool. We've got a bunch of workshops, similar to your Friday forums, Cyndy, where we'll be talking, in a couple weeks with Mark Kruver about the power of AI and how this can potentially impact our work as counselors. And then our friend, our mutual friend, Stephen Antonoff's going to talk about finding great colleges. We're going to talk about working with neurodivergent students. We've got a pretty lively chat that's going on here. We've got a lot talking about ChatGPT, a huge thread on this. And then we've got this cool resource in here called the College Counselor Blueprint that is essentially a PDF that it's a series of questions that will help you essentially figure out what are your strengths in counseling and how would you sort of self-assess. So a whole bunch that I'm excited to invite and create more community, because to be really honest with you, Cyndy, and we've talked about this before, I think, but this can be lonely work. And I think part of why you and I both do this is we want to create community and connection around this, and just like this and dialogue. So I miss you and miss my counseling community, and I'm excited to see you at the Super ACAT conference and IECA and HECA, but it's not enough. And this is why we started the community. So I want to invite folks to check it out. And there's, there are pay what you can spots and payment plans for all of the courses. So yeah.
No, that sounds great. That'll be great. And yes, I will have links, and if people come through my website, then they'll know that they're coming, you'll know that they're coming from me. So I appreciate that as well. So we'll be definitely, and as Ethan said, since the one course just started, you're not too late. You can still join the course and participate. So the 15th was just 2 days ago. So it just started a couple of days. And next week, I'm going to have Brad Schiller from Prompt, and he's going to be talking about that exact AI topic. And I'm actually going to have Mark Kruver later on talk about AI as well. But Brad is going to talk about college essays and ChatGPT, whether it's a problem or a solution. And then Hannah's going to be here in 2 weeks, and she's going to talk about helping us to think about and talk about valuing ourselves. That's one of the soapboxes I'm on. People hear me talk about this all the time. In April, I'm going to have Stefano Papaleo and Greg Zeiser going to talk about experiential learning. Stefano's from Lynn University and Greg is from Elon. So I've got a lot of great things coming up, and then another one in the end of April. So I'll have all these on my website that you guys all can participate in. I'm doing a what to name your price workshop next week. And so I have a couple of spots left. So I'll put that in my email as well if somebody wants to work on their pricing and what they're charging. Because overall, I think we undercharge, for our services. That's why having Hannah's message is so important, and all the different things that we do to help raise our industry and be able to value what we offer, and then do, like, and I've have other ways too, but creating spots for people so that you do have that, create that access. We can do both. So thank you, Ethan. Thank you for being here today. Any closing words of wisdom you want to share?
I'm present to gratitude, Cyndy, because I feel like I think I'm thinking about this theme of like connection and community. And I think it's become especially important to me coming out of the pandemic. And so I just feel like really touched by the work that you do in this group. And yeah, I'm grateful to have spent this time with you all. And I look forward to connecting more soon. I'll see you, I guess, next time. I think I see you will be in a month at the Super Applicants. So
yeah, we'll all be in Spokane. So those of you that are participating in the Super ACAC for the Western, it's going to be in Spokane, Washington. It's for WACAC, Pacific Northwest, and Rocky Mountain. So I know those of you have Texas, Southern, all these wonderful conferences that'll be coming up in April. So thank you, Ethan, again. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I always enjoy, and I'm totally with you, having that community. That's why I started Friday Forums, so we could come together, and I never imagined it would continue on, and I'm so grateful for that. So everybody have a great weekend, and thank you again for being with us today.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.